Okay, so welcome to the Sanctuary podcast. My name is Daniel Whitehead. I am the CEO of Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries, and during COVID-19, I'm also your host for this podcast. The whole vision for this podcast in this season is that we connect with friends of sanctuaries, just people around the world who are doing great work in the whole intersection of mental health and faith, and people with a story to tell. And we just really want to drill into their story and hear how they're doing in this time. Today, we're joined by a really good friend of mine, Elli Johnson. Elli is based in Liverpool, England. Elli is an author. She's written one excellent book called How Not to Be Good, which I've read, and it is a really, really good book. She's got another book brewing, which maybe she'll tell us about. Elli, though she lives in Liverpool, is not from Liverpool, as you'll hear from her accent. If you're accustomed to British accents, as I am, she is not a Liverpudlian, but just Elli has an amazing story and does amazing work, and we're delighted to have her with us. Hi, Elli.
Hi.
So, Elli, COVID-19.
Yes.
How's that going?
Well, it's going. I feel like there's not really a one answer to that, is there? Because every day, although the day involves all of the same things as the day before and the day after will, emotionally, from one day to the next, whether it's me, my husband, my children, who knows what we're going to get, really. But yeah, we're doing okay. Overall, I would say we're doing pretty good.
And how many children? Tell everyone your sort of home situation at the moment, Elli.
So I am married, been married for 20 years this summer. And we have 3 kids, 2 girls who are 15 and 13, and a son who's 10.
Okay.
And we all are in our house at the moment, obviously. My husband doesn't normally work from home, whereas I do. And he has taken over my study, and I am in the spare room because that's what happens when he needs to work.
Wow.
Yeah. Great sacrifice on my part.
Was that a happy agreement?
It was a necessary agreement. I don't think happy is the word I would use. It was fine. It makes most sense because I'm writing and can organize my own time and have occasional, but not very often, need for Zoom calls and all the rest of it. And I'm also the one doing the lion's share of the homeschooling. And he is on different Zoom calls with people he works with and with clients and people he works with all day long from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. So him being in a room with the door shut, away from the noise of the rest of us, works better. Although I did feel quite sad giving up my space.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Tell me about that.
It's just, to be honest, when I think it was probably a week or 10 days before we went into actual lockdown, when it started looking like schools were going to close. And I realised that before I realised that also that was going to mean my husband was going to be working from home. And I'm not sure which I found more distressing, if I'm perfectly honest. It's one thing to be at home on my own with the kids, which is what happens most of the holidays, apart from the time that my husband has off work. It's another thing altogether for us all to be together and all to be trying to do the different things that we want to do all in one space all the time. I think there was a bit of grieving about what this season was going to look like for me. I'm, as you said, I'm in the process of trying to write my second book, and I was just really getting my teeth into it. And I had sort of a plan that I was going to get this first draft written by, the end of this month was my plan. That's not happening. And so there has been a process of gradually accepting the limits of what are possible and actually being okay with that. And I think that's for all of us in our house. For me, my husband and my kids, my eldest daughter was meant to be sitting her GCSEs this summer. And when we found out those exams were cancelled, that was, I mean, I cannot remember the last time. It sounds ridiculous, really, but I cannot remember the last time I felt so utterly devastated for her, really. Because she's a really hard worker, and she was in her she'll be moving schools in September, so it was her last term at this school that she's been at since she was 5. And they're a great year group, and they've been working really hard, and it's that whole thing that we're aiming towards this thing that you're being told for years and years is really important, it's really important, it's really important, and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, it doesn't matter, and it's gone. And that kind of just like, and when we heard we were listening to the news, and we heard Boris Johnson announce that all exams, GCSEs, A-levels, all exams were being cancelled. And she ran downstairs into the kitchen, just went, oh, is it true? Is it true? Is it true? And I was like, I'm listening, I don't know. And then we both just burst into tears. And really, I think we both cried on and off for 48 hours. And a lot of the time I felt a bit stupid, because I was like, oh, it's just GCSEs. And in the big scheme of things, that doesn't really matter. No one ever asks you what you got for your GCSEs after 2 years later.
That is true.
But it was more the kind of rites of passage for her, for me. It was the expectation and anticipation that was just suddenly like the rug was pulled. And it was also just understanding that it was the first thing that made us really realize, life is really going to change now.
Yeah.
And we all have got to get on board with this as quickly as we can, because that's what is necessary. Yeah. And I think the crying, I felt silly. I felt really silly because I just couldn't stop. Like, people would see me in the street and I would just burst into tears. Or, I'd be in the supermarket trying to get a few, I'd just burst into tears. And I'd be like, I'm so sorry. I don't even know why I'm crying, really. I just have to cry. But now I look back and I think, actually, I'm quite glad that I cried so much, because it enabled her to cry. And for me, it meant that I wasn't trying to make everything okay through my own sort of willpower. And actually I was accepting the fact that it wasn't okay, and it was sad. And I don't know where I've picked this up. Could have been Brené Brown, could have been Susan David, could have been any of the brilliant thinkers. But the whole thing about emotion needs motion. Like, there needs to be movement. We need to allow it to move through us. And those first 2 days were really hard, but it was kind of a good process. Yes, I got distracted there. I got off the point.
No, that's great. I think we'll come back to crying, because I think that's a good thing to talk about. But it's interesting reflecting on in our home when the news broke here that schools are closing. And Annie, my wife, she works as a children's pastor in a church, but was a teacher by vocation. She came through and said they've announced schools are closing, and there's sort of tears welling up in her eyes. And as much as Annie loves education and Evie going to school and those things, I knew it was way deeper than that. The tears were something really bad is happening, something really serious is happening, and the world has changed. And that's what it was. And it was interesting reflecting on my own response to that. I mean, I will process my emotions probably about 10 years time. Or slowly, over a longer period.
Slowlier than Annie.
In that moment, I suddenly go up and go, well, this is happening. This is what we're going to do.
Let's make a plan.
So there was this disconnect in the moment, which I'm not proud of. I'm really not. Like, I know this stuff. I read books. I listened to Brené Brown. I'm friends with Hilary McBride. I know this stuff. But nevertheless, there is this challenge. Talking around crying and tears, I think that's there's something there to press into, because it will seem really obvious to those of us that are working in a kind of mental health environment or around it, or speaking to this, that emotional connection, emotional engagement, emotional intelligence, all those things are vital to having well-being, to being in touch. And it's always struck me, as a person of faith, I know you're a person of faith, that this challenge in the scriptures, when Jesus encounters a group of people who are grieving, he goes to the tomb of Lazarus, and when he sees them grieving, what does he do? He weeps, which to me is strange, because if I were Jesus, and clearly I think I would have done a better job when I make opening statements like that.
If I were Jesus,
if I were Jesus, I would have said, guys, don't cry. Like, there's no need. I'm going to fix this.
It's all good, people. Don't worry about it.
It would have been fine. And yet his response, God in human flesh, the one who creates and holds and sustains all things in human flesh, his first response is empathy, is to cry, to be stirred by the. And so there's something in that, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And I think and maybe this is a problem with my definition of empathy, but I think that I want to think that he was also grieving. He wasn't just like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
crying like because you're crying. He was
Mm.
crying because he was also sad.
Mm.
And I don't know. That's not theologically based, but I like to think that, yeah, that Jesus was so totally human that he couldn't not weep
Yeah.
when something really bad was happening. But yeah, I remember my therapist said to me, I was just, for anybody who doesn't know me, I was diagnosed with postnatal depression and generalized anxiety disorder 10 years ago now. And it came as a massive shock, and I didn't know. Sorry, Dan, I know you know all this, but
No,
it came as
please
a
tell
massive shock,
people.
and I didn't know that I had been ill for quite a long time, and I'd been trying to make myself be okay. And a lot of that looked like trying to shut down how I felt, apologizing for tears, feeling weak for crying, feeling like my anxiety was my own fault. And if only I was stronger, then I wouldn't feel like that. And being from a faith background, if only I was holier, prayed more, had more faith, whatever, I wouldn't feel like that. I wouldn't feel the need for these. And this is in inverted commas, if you can't see me, negative emotions, because there are no negative or positive emotions. There's just emotions. But I had to learn that. And my therapist said to me, I was crying again with her this is quite near the beginning, and I started to say sorry, and she said, oh really, no, all tears are therapeutic. And I say that to my kids now. I say, no, crying is good, all tears are therapeutic. Like there's a release that's needed, or it's expressing how we're feeling. And I don't want to just not everybody's a crier. Like I think that we're different, aren't we? And I yeah, I know that some people crying comes really easily. I cry quite easily these days, but I don't know if everybody does. But somehow this experience is provoking emotional responses. And if we don't allow those and acknowledge those emotional responses, then we can't get to the other side of that and then start to work towards working through them, trying to understand, or get past the if we deny the initial emotional response. There's always a healthy way to express that. It doesn't have to be throwing things across a room, but if we deny the initial emotional response, whether that's anger or tears or whatever it is, then we can't move past that feeling. It's like it's stuck. It's we're just stuffing it down, trying to repress it with other things, whether that's TV or booze or cake or whatever,
anything. Yeah.
Anything. And I've seen it in my son. He has cried a bit, but it's mainly acting out, which looks more like anger, and it looks like tantrums, which aren't. He's 10. That's not that normal anymore. Occasional. We all have a tantrum occasionally, but his inability to talk about or process the things that he was missing meant that he would just get very frustrated, and then it would sort of erupt. And it took me a couple of times. I got this wrong a couple of times when I would like lay down the law, or say, okay, you need to go to your room, you don't speak to me like that, or whatever. And then I realized, oh no, that's not what this is. This is grief manifesting. This is his inability to process what is happening manifesting, and actually all he needs is me to hug him. And like, this isn't the time for discipline, for him right now. That's not what's necessary. What's necessary is him to just know that he's safe and he's loved. I mean, that's mainly what's necessary all the time, really, isn't it? But even more so now, this isn't the time to be saying, that's not how we do things in this house. Yes, of course, we still need boundaries, and he definitely needs routine. But actually, I've realized that it's more important for me to acknowledge how he's feeling, to say, I know it's really hard. I know you're really missing your friends. I know you're finding it really hard that you're at home and you're having to learn, even just having to learn remotely, even though I'm right there with him. He's used to being in a classroom, to goofing about with his friends, being able to tell his friends that he thinks it's boring, and, answering the questions and getting something right and getting praised for it. And that can still happen, but in a very limited way, when it's just me and him sat at the kitchen table. And so to be able to say to him, like, this is really hard and you're doing really well, and I really love you, and it's going to be okay. And it kind of took me a while to realize that that's what his meltdowns needed, much more than, me being strict or any kind of punishment. I mean, gosh, it's just not the time for that.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? When we think about, often we and I know that you believe this, but when we talk about our children, and like, I have a son who's 4 years old, and sometimes he'll respond certain ways that 4-year-olds do. And my wife will remind me occasionally when I'm not quite seeing it, will say, well, he's only able to process one emotion at a time. Like he can't multitask his emotions. And then she'll say that, and I think it's the same with me. It's like, we analyze our children and go, oh yes, this is what they're experiencing, and this is how they react. I'm like, no, that's how we react as adults as well. It's like we get angry, and suddenly we think, if we do the work, we think, well, why am I angry? Like, what's really going on here? And anger is obviously a valid emotion, but it's interesting to me, in your journey as a person of faith, you kind of came to this realization that you received this diagnosis. And the process of coming to own that, and then looking back at your story as a person of faith, I wonder, were there tensions there in terms of what you were implicitly believing? You alluded to it earlier, but maybe talk a bit more.
Were there tensions? Let me think.
Yes, well, there you go.
I had to unpick the whole thing. I think, yes, very much so. The way I had understood how to be a person of faith, how to be a Christian, was so much weighted on my behavior and my ability to do it right. And I knew about grace, and I knew about the gospel, and I tick all them boxes. Yeah, I know all that. But then what would always be left with me was and what are you going to do in response? Like, because you have been given such a great prize, salvation, and grace for all the things that you've done wrong and all the ways in which you screw up, and now what, Ellie? And I have come to realize that, well, that isn't how I think about faith anymore at all, and that rewiring, dismantling the old framework and then trying to figure out what goes in its place has taken 10 years, and I'm not there. Just still working on it. But fundamentally, the idea that there was any way in which I needed to contribute to my acceptance, I needed to perform, to do anything at all to make myself worthy of acceptance, was something that it's taken a long time to come to grips with it in any way, because really my if you like, my teenage years were all the don'ts, don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex, don't have friends who are unsuitable, don't dress immodestly, don't blah 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 blah. And all my 20s were all the do's. Do work hard, do run small groups, do be a godly parent, do have an excellent marriage, do volunteer, do be a good friend, do pray, do read your Bible, do blah 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 blah. Added on to all the don'ts that we've already had, and it felt like it became less and less possible to trust myself, to be able to do any of those things. And I mean, this is I am condensing, a decade's worth of thinking and learning about this, and therefore this is going to be only fragments of the truth. But it came really from an idea that I had I'd put original sin before original goodness. So in the Garden of Eden story, when Adam and Eve, or Eve and Adam, as lots of people like to say at this point, eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, having been tempted by the serpent, original sin, as I was always taught, original sin entered the world. And there was this idea that we were originally sinful. But actually, I was forgetting the chapter that came before that talked about how we were created good, and how God looks and he says, "This is very good." And I kind of that had not even factored in my thinking. I'd only focused on the fact that I was in some way not good enough and had to work very hard to make myself good enough, which in a way is kind of why the book's called How Not to Be Good, because I'd spent so many years trying to be good, trying to repair the things that I wasn't good enough at, trying to have a consistent prayer life, trying to, I don't know, volunteer at church in the kids' work. I mean, I was really bad, and I really had a bad attitude about that because I was terrible at it and I hated it. Or to try and be patient with my kids, or to be gracious with my husband, or, you know, whatever it might be. And every time I failed or I fell short of what I thought was expected of me, which when I examined it, what I thought was expected of me was perfection, which was pretty unattainable. It just piled on the pressure to try harder. And I think that was probably one of the main strands that contributed to my anxiety and depression, because I started becoming these two separate people. The person who I really was, who felt like a failure and like she was getting it wrong all the time and was trying to constantly repress all my actual needs and desires. And this other person who I showed, who I was like, oh, here's shiny Ellie, who does the right thing and, you know, looks good and ticks all the boxes. And that dislocation between the me who I really was and the me who I thought I should be created well, I think that was one of the main contributing causes to my depression. And so yeah, the faith element of it wasn't the only thing. There was lots of other things: 3 small children, a busy life, all the rest of it. But I would say that the faith strand was the thing that I found it very hard to silence, because it was so woven into my upbringing and my belief system and my value system. So yeah, so unpicking that and realizing that original goodness comes first, and that I in no way need to contribute towards my acceptance, because I am accepted, because I exist, because I was created, because I'm loved. That's quite a big mind shift. And it catches me out all the time still, you know, when I realize that I'm performing, or I'm trying to make somebody like me, or I'm, you know, whatever it is I'm doing. So yeah, sorry, big answer. It was a big question. I don't apologize for giving a big answer.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer. And I wonder how often, so in terms of your faith journey, this crisis, like in some senses, I've only known you since, I'm going to say Elli 2.0, but you know, you know, you're a work in progress.
It's actually Elli original who you've met.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Getting back to original Elli, the good Elli. But getting back to that, how has your experience of faith subsequently, and let's say your experience of the church with this mental health thing you're carrying, has that been a natural fit for others? What kind of response have you had? Where have you found a safe space in the church to be this Elli?
That's a very difficult question, Dan, and one I don't know that I can fully answer, because I don't know if I fully have an answer. One thing I will say for sure is I have found lots of other people who are on a similar journey to me, in lots of faith communities. And that is, I'm definitely don't, it sometimes feels very lonely when you're unpicking things that felt like they were expectations laid down by a certain faith community. I'm not saying that they were, but when that's the kind of general assumption, is that we work hard together for the gospel, if you like, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Hard work is not a bad thing, but the motivation behind it is not always necessarily massively healthy. Or maybe I can only talk to myself. In my experience, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't healthy. And I don't know whether churches, and I just want to speak in broad terms, if that's all right. But I don't know how much churches have really, or really understand the mental health implications of of some of the teaching, which is well intentioned and good, and often sound. But I think that we maybe have an imbalance in the things that we're taught sometimes in certain churches, and that the works element, although we know the right answers, we know that it's not by works that we are saved. Actually, there's a lot of talk about works, and maybe not that much talk about grace. And I would definitely say that I have found people of faith who I am working this out with. Doesn't necessarily look like a formal church arrangement, although I still go to church. I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm getting the chance to explore all those things in a formal church arrangement at the moment, because, and I know lots of people hate this word, but to a certain extent, a church is an institution, and an institution or an organization has to, in part, exist to maintain itself. And therefore, there has to be work that goes into maintaining the organizational structure and the institution of the church. And that's not always compatible with the broken people that the church is looking to serve. And I count myself in that category. We had one conversation a while back with some people, being vague, about what a successful, again, using that word in inverted commas advisedly, church Sunday morning would look like. And there were lots of reasonable answers about people being engaged with worship, or a really good theologically sound word being preached, or people responding to that word well. And I didn't say anything. And then eventually I said, surely it just looks like the most broken and needy and desperate people feeling safe, and like there's a place that they can come, and no acceptance. And everyone's like, oh yeah. But actually, I think those two things can be in tension quite often, because churches want the appearance. Oh, I don't know. I don't really want to say much more about that. But I think that it's difficult. I think that it's complicated for a community to exist for the benefit of its weakest members, which is kind of what the church is kind of meant to do.
That's very interesting. I was chatting with Ruth Rice, who you also know.
Yeah.
I think, did I introduce you to Ruth Rice?
You did.
Yeah. And Ruth runs this organization, Renew Wellbeing, which was born out of her own brokenness, her own experience of burnout as a minister, and really asking the question, what kind of community do I need to be well? And so she created this thing which they call Renew Wellbeing, which is this space which has this rhythm of prayer, which is optional. People, they pray 3 times a day. It's very kind of monastic in that sense, loosely monastic, but follows that pattern. And it's always done in a side room people can go into. But the rest of the time, this is just a space where people connect and find belonging and wellness. And somehow in the midst of that environment they create, surprisingly, surprise, God is somehow in the midst. And there are people, encountering community and love and grace and mercy and in those spaces. So to me, it's an amazing model that any church can pick up. But that one of the dangers is that churches go, oh, well, this is another thing, so we'll just do this thing. Now people go and do their thing, but we're doing the Sunday morning thing. And yet there is the churches that do that Renew thing well. It's more like a philosophy of how they see the body of Christ as this messy, broken group of people that are trying to work it out together.
I think the community part is something that I haven't quite found my place in for that element yet. But I would say that I found that I encounter God more in my garden than generally in church services at the moment. Would be the truth, the absolute truth. I find or walking by the river, or being outdoors, I feel connected to God in a way that buildings don't always quite work for me at the moment. And I think it's part of my journey, to use that word, but it's part of my process at the moment, because I think there's a certain necessary element of healing, I think, that has to come from me. And also well, here's the thing. So the whole idea of pattern matching experiences with places or things that trigger memories of that certain thing. So, for example, having been brought up in a church environment, which in many ways was excellent, like there was loads of excellent things about it, but one of the things about it was actually I ended up not very well, and I often felt that very much in the church, and I felt my sense of not quite being able to figure it out and make it work. And therefore, sometimes I can be in a church environment and I can sort of find myself going back there to being the other Ellie who's trying to do all these things. And that's not necessarily very helpful for me. Whereas being outside and being in the garden and paying attention to creation, or, whatever it might be, is something that is new to me, and therefore there's no negative associations with those things, and I feel like I can think clearer, like the clouds clear, and I can make more sense of it. And if you don't mind me just going off on a bit of a tangent here, the situation that we're in at the moment with lockdown really reminded me. I didn't realize for 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks, I was really struggling, and I felt this anger growing in me about the situation, about being trapped at home, about the fact that my husband was in my office, working all the hours, and I was stuck downstairs doing the homeschooling, not getting to write the book that I wanted to be writing, not able to see my friends or give myself, or necessarily using all the things that I have used in the past 10 years to make myself stay well, whether that's walking or seeing a friend or whatever it might be. And it took 2 weeks, and I suddenly realized, I'm getting really angry. I'm getting really angry about the situation. This is totally unfair. Why am I the one doing this? So, all that poor me going on. And I had a big row with my husband, because that's the healthy thing to do, right? And it was only the next day, and it was fine. There was no solution, but we, worked it through, and we still liked each other at the end, so it's fine. Then the next day I suddenly realized, I've regressed 10, 12, 13 years back to the me that was stuck at home with the young kids, who was actually seriously depressed, who didn't know it, who was feeling trapped and isolated, and like everybody else could do this better than her, and she was making a mess of it and all the rest of it. And I had absolutely, in my mind, pattern matched to this previous experience of being stuck at home with children. But as soon as I realized that, it was like the lights came on, and I was like, but I'm not that person anymore, and I don't have to experience this like that, and I can make this work in a way for me where I'm still able to do some of the things that I need to do, that I can give my kids my time, but I'm also not trapped, and I'm not stuck in this. I can ask for what I want and what I need here in these, constrained environments and situations that we're in. And it was such a revelation. And I wrote something on Instagram about it, and I spoke to a couple of people about it, and they were like, that's exactly what I've done. That is exactly what I've done. I think people who have had experiences of postnatal depression, particularly, who are back now at home, trying to homeschool, maybe trying to do another job at the same time, all the rest of it. I think that there are very similar feelings of isolation and separation that can occur. And you have to sort of give yourself a moment to recognize that this isn't the same thing, and maybe you're not the same person as you were. I know that's a complete answer to a completely different question, but I just thought I'd throw it out.
Well, it's a great answer. And I think that whole, that instinctive, that inbuilt trauma recognition thing that we have, to me, I mean, I know working in this environment of faith and mental health and talking to different people, some people get very nervous when you begin to talk about the science of this and going, well, actually, there's something inbuilt in us that if you are put into a situation that reminds you of a traumatic event, it will trigger a certain response, that kind of fight or flight thing. And yet for me as a person of faith, as as someone who studied theology, to me it just speaks of how fearfully and wonderfully made we are, how
Yeah.
God has made us. He's thought of every little detail, that actually, if we're in a dangerous situation, or a situation that feels dangerous and we don't even know it, but subconsciously it feels dangerous, he's created us to respond in a way that's going to get us out of that situation.
Yes. Yeah. It's for our own protection, isn't it? And you wouldn't want. I want my kids to step into the road and a car comes past and them having to step back really quickly, and then the next time I want them to think before they cross the road, but I want them to have that feeling of, oh, this is a dangerous situation, I need to pay attention here, and it's you're right, it's not that pattern matching thing is for my protection, and it's to open my eyes to the situation, and to it's for my own growth and protection, like you say. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And that thing, I mean, you can tell that you've done the work, where your response to what is otherwise a very negative emotion, like that feeling of anger and just carrying anger, is to go, what's it telling me? And then in some ways, you can then say, oh, well, thank you, inbuilt response. Thank you, anger, for you have my back, but I'm okay.
I'm okay now. I've
I've
got this one.
I can put these things in place. And that to me speaks as someone who's done the work, and I know that hasn't happened overnight, but
no.
but I really admire you for that.
Oh, thanks, Dan. One other thing, my husband did he's not on any social media, and hilariously he was asked to do an Instagram live, and he had to do it off our 15-year-old's account, which just really made my day, that he was going on under my daughter's account on this Instagram live. But somebody asked him, how are you coping, or what are you doing in this time, and he said, kind of off the cuff, well, for the last 10 years, we've been deliberately slowing our life down. So it's probably been a bit easier for us than it is for other people. And boy, is that true. We have slowed everything down, and our lives still feel full. But compared to the ridiculous ideal that we used to have of what we should be able to fit into an hour a day, a week, we have really cold at the diary, and initially that was just because we had to, because there was no alternative. Like I was really not very well, and that was what was necessary. And then we realized, oh, hang on a second, we can't go back, because if we went back, we'd just end up ill again. So that was a non-starter.
Well, that's really interesting that you raise such a potential other thing to go down when it's nearly time to finish. But I think if it's possible to sort of summarize that point, which I think is an amazing thing to recognize, is that there are many people that would argue that our culture has been operating in a way that is not conducive to wellness. That ultimately we see ourselves as our value is attached to what we can produce. The faster we go, the more we're praised. So we're actually rewarding people for pursuing a lack of wellness. And that whole thing of love has a speed, which I think John Swinton, who again, is a friend of Sanctuaries, but John has written about that love has a speed, and that ultimately that love is kind of a slow process. You can't hurry love. No, you'll just have to wait. Who said that? But the point is, I think and that's one of these strange, weird, and this is a very Western perspective. I know for many people, what's happening right now is only darkness and difficult. If you cannot earn the money today to pay for your bread tomorrow, you and your family are going hungry. So I'm not trying to trivialize what's going on. What's happening is horrendous, and we need this to end. Lord, help us. We need this to end. But one of the strange reoccurring gifts that I know I have encountered, and I'm hearing from other people, is that people have time, and in that place of time, people are able to notice. People who live with their families, that they notice their children more. They're saying, oh, I'm getting to see my children more than I did, and there's something I feel kind of guilty about enjoying this a little bit, because I know I shouldn't be, but there is a strange gift in just being given time. And I think this whole mental health conversation, a lot of what I hear from people who are pursuing wellness and doing well, is that they found a new rhythm, a new way of engaging with time. That they're not dancing to a tune that someone else has told them. They're now slowing down and living the life that they can live, and pursuing wellness. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's more that could
Yeah.
be said, but
I think it's absolutely true. And at the moment, we were joking the other day about like, why did we buy a diary for this year? Like, what was the point? Like, everything that was in it has been cancelled. But actually, the idea of having a diary and scheduling in rest, like actually scheduling it, because we schedule everything else, and we schedule, all the time that we have a lot of the time. And now I've learned that if I look at my diary and I'm out more than 2 evenings in a week, well, that's not going to go well for me. And it's actually not going to go well for my family either. And that's not because I'm a martyr to my kids and like cooking home cooked food. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to go well for my kids because I'm not going to end up very well.
yeah,
Maybe 3 nights at a push, but like that's just got to be 1 week, and then the next week I'd have to take it easier. Whereas I used to think I could be out 4 nights a week, no stress every week. In fact, I had regular commitments 3 nights a week, regardless. And now, I think even if it's something I really want to do, and I've realized, simple things like, obviously when we're not in lockdown, wanting to see friends and recognizing that the rhythm of our friendship is actually that we don't see each other every week or even every 2 weeks. Maybe we see each other once a month, maybe every 6 weeks. And actually acknowledging that and being like, that doesn't mean that I don't care about them. That doesn't mean that they're not really important to me. It doesn't mean that we won't probably text each other in between. But life is, if you work and you've got kids, or, even if you don't, life is full. And actually recognizing that and then putting plans in place is absolutely necessary to, maintaining mental health and well-being, and also just for fun. Like, life is a lot more fun when you're not knackered all the time. Really is.
Yeah. It's so true. And it's so funny, it strikes me, Ellie, it's so funny that we can sit here and we can pat ourselves on the back and go, oh yeah, calendarizing rest. There's a great idea. There's a novel, new idea that we've worked out after 44 minutes of talking. We've worked out that to calendarize rest is the thing. And yet they're right at the beginning of the Genesis narrative, right at the beginning. Don't forget to rest.
Yeah. And I love my favorite. I'm going to make a little plug for it. My favorite book that I've read about Sabbath is called Sabbath, by Wayne Muller. I don't know if you've read that book.
No,
and it's absolutely brilliant. And that book has challenged me so many times about what it actually means to rest, like what is actual rest, as opposed to like, we'll think, I'm having a day off today, but actually your day off is filled with chores. It's not actually a day off, or, whatever it might be. And not resting when the work's finished, but resting because it's time for rest is another real challenge to our like Western capitalist mindset, really, isn't it? We think, oh, well, I've just got to get all that done and then I'll be able to rest. Well, no, if you work till you get all that done, you'll probably just collapse. You won't rest. You'll just, zone out. But yeah, it's a concept that's been there since the very beginning, and yet we are still trying to learn it.
Wow. Well, Ellie, thank you so much for sharing from your experience, and your honesty and candor is just so needed. And I'm just grateful that your work is getting out there. Quickly tell people how they can connect with you via various online platforms.
Gosh, I struggle to remember them all. Basically, I'm Elli Johnson, which is ELLIJOHNSON. There's no E on the end of my name. I don't know why. That's how my parents spelt it. I don't know anybody else who spells it like that, but that's how it is. And it's ellijohnson.com. And then you can find links to everything from there. I'm on Instagram, Elli Johnson UK. And I've written a book called How Not to Be Good, which at the moment is only for sale through my website. That's it.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll change soon. So Ellie, thank you so much for joining us. If you've been listening to this or watching this and you think it's good, share it with other people. Go to sanctuarymentalhealth.org to find all our resources, the Sanctuary course, an 8-session course on faith and mental health, the grief resource, which will be launched by the time that this airs, which is a 4-session course, our blog, various other things. But look up sanctuarymentalhealth.org, go to ellijohnson.com.
That's right.
Go there. And yeah, thanks for joining us.
Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries exists to equip the church to be a sanctuary for all people at all stages of their mental wellness journeys. May this podcast encourage you to create safe space for your own story and the stories of others, as well as create change in communities that stigmatize those suffering with mental health challenges. The Sanctuary course is a small group resource designed to help initiate and guide conversations about mental health and faith. It is a starting point, creating a base of shared knowledge from which churches can explore the next steps. Perhaps most importantly, through the simple act of talking openly about mental health, the course helps churches begin to create safe spaces for people to share their mental health stories and receive support in community. Each theme in the course is explored from a psychological, social, and theological perspective, and each session is accompanied by a compelling film focused on an individual's story, a person of faith who has journeyed through mental health challenges. Interested in exploring the Sanctuary course for use in your community? Learn more at sanctuarycourse.com. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 license. Don't change it or sell it, but please share it all you like.